The first time my family tried to turn my life into a permanent babysitting service, I laughed because I honestly thought they were joking. But the laughter died when my older brother, Daniel, slid a folder across my aunt's dining table and said, "We've already put your name down as the emergency contact for the kids, so there's really nothing left to discuss." I stared at the paperwork beneath his hand, then at his wife, Brielle, who was 8 months pregnant and calmly eating strawberries as though she had not just announced a decision that would control my life, while my mother, Evelyn, smiled approvingly and said that family members were supposed to step up when life became difficult. For years, I had been the person everyone called whenever something went wrong, partly because I worked remotely and partly because my family had quietly convinced themselves that having no children of my own meant having unlimited time for theirs. So I had missed weekend trips, canceled plans, worked late from hospital waiting rooms, and once even spent an entire Christmas Eve assembling toy furniture, while Daniel and Brielle attended a party with friends. Their 3 children, 11-year-old Sophie, 7-year-old Caleb, and 4-year-old Eli, were wonderful kids whom I genuinely loved. But every favor somehow became an obligation. Every emergency became my responsibility, and every attempt to say no was treated as evidence that I had become selfish. The breaking point arrived during a rainy Saturday dinner at my grandmother's house, when Daniel casually announced that after the baby arrived, he and Brielle planned to move closer to their jobs and would need someone reliable to handle school pickups, appointments, sick days, and occasional overnight stays. And before I could even respond, my mother proudly announced that I would be perfect because my apartment was close to their children's school. I put my fork down and told them plainly that I had never agreed to become their backup parent, but Daniel laughed and said, "You always say that before eventually helping," while Brielle added with a shrug, "Besides, what else are you doing with your life?" Something about those words landed differently this time because they revealed that my family had not merely overlooked my boundaries. They had built an entire definition of my worth around how useful I was to them, so instead of defending my career, my friendships, or the future I was quietly building for myself, I stood up and said, "Apparently, you have mistaken my kindness for availability." My mother immediately accused me of embarrassing everyone. Daniel called me dramatic, and Brielle began crying before anyone had even finished the conversation. But I walked out into the rain without apologizing, and for the first time in years, the silence inside my car felt more peaceful than the noise inside my family's house. The following Monday, I expected angry messages, but instead I received an email from Sophie's elementary school confirming that I had been listed as an authorized pickup person and emergency contact, complete with my phone number, apartment address, and workplace information, even though I had never signed a single permission form. I immediately called the school office and explained that I had not authorized the arrangement, and the secretary sounded surprised before telling me that Daniel had submitted paperwork claiming I was the children's primary family support, a phrase that made my stomach twist because it transformed years of informal favors into something that looked official. I drove straight to Daniel's house that afternoon and found him packing boxes while Brielle sat surrounded by baby supplies. And when I held up the school paperwork and asked why my name was being used without permission, Daniel barely looked up before saying they had assumed I would cooperate because, "You're their aunt, not some stranger." I told him that being related to someone did not give him ownership over my time, and when he snapped that I was choosing my independent little lifestyle over 3 children who loved me, I calmly replied, "No, Daniel, I am choosing not to let guilt make decisions for me anymore." Then came the phone call that changed everything, because 2 days later, while I was in the middle of an important video meeting, the school secretary called again and said Caleb had become sick and Daniel had told them I was coming to collect him. So I immediately explained that I had never agreed to pick him up and asked them to contact his parents directly. Less than 20 minutes later, Daniel called me furious, accusing me of abandoning a sick child, but I reminded him that I had already told him in writing that I was unavailable, and after a long silence he finally muttered, "Fine, we'll figure it out ourselves," before hanging up as though I had committed some terrible betrayal. That evening, however, my grandmother called me and asked me to visit her alone, and when I arrived, she handed me an old metal box containing letters, photographs, and documents from my late grandfather, including a handwritten note he had left for each of his children about the importance of respecting one another's lives. One sentence stopped me completely. Love should make people feel safe enough to say no. And my grandmother quietly explained that she had watched my family turn generosity into obligation for years, but she had never intervened because she believed I needed to discover for myself that protecting my peace was not the same thing as abandoning the people I loved. The next morning, I wrote one message to my entire family and attached copies of every document showing that my name had been used without permission, explaining that I would no longer serve as an emergency contact, transportation provider, overnight caregiver, financial backup, or last-minute solution. And I made it clear that I still loved the children, but would only spend time with them when arrangements were discussed with me in advance. Daniel responded almost immediately with a furious paragraph accusing me of trying to punish everyone because I was unhappy with my own life, while my mother sent a separate message saying that my grandfather would be ashamed of the way I was treating family. But I refused to argue because, for once, I understood that their anger did not automatically mean I had done something wrong. A week later, Daniel and Brielle held a small family meeting and asked me to come, promising that everyone would remain calm. And when I arrived, I discovered that they had invited several relatives who had only heard Daniel's version of events. Daniel stood in front of everyone and described me as unreliable, cold, and resentful. But instead of defending myself emotionally, I placed the original school paperwork on the table, showed the emails proving I had never authorized it, and explained exactly how often I had been expected to cancel my plans without notice, after which the room became so quiet that even my mother stopped looking at me. Then Sophie unexpectedly spoke from the hallway, saying that she did not understand why everyone was fighting, but knew that I had always helped them because I loved them. And that simple sentence changed the atmosphere more than any document could have, because she reminded the adults that the children were watching everything. I walked over, hugged her, and told her that loving someone did not mean allowing them to decide everything for you. And when Daniel finally lowered his eyes and admitted that he had assumed I would always rescue them, I told him that I hoped he learned how to build a life where asking for help was different from assigning responsibility. Months later, my relationship with Daniel remained distant, and my mother still occasionally tried to make me feel guilty. But my life became strangely lighter once I stopped waiting for permission to have boundaries, because I started taking weekend trips, spending evenings with friends, accepting work opportunities I had previously rejected, and even returning to a photography hobby I had abandoned years earlier. I still visited Sophie, Caleb, and Eli, but now I visited because I wanted to, not because a crisis had been placed in my lap. And whenever they ran toward me at the door, I felt no resentment at all because the difference between love and obligation had finally become crystal clear. Looking back, I realized my family had never truly needed me to be their servant. They had simply become comfortable with the version of me who always sacrificed first and questioned herself afterward. And the moment I stopped playing that role, they initially called me selfish because people who benefit from your lack of boundaries rarely celebrate when you finally create them. If you have ever been treated like the dependable one, the available one, or the person who is expected to fix every problem simply because you have always been kind, remember that you can love your family deeply while still protecting your time, your dreams, and your future, because sometimes the most courageous thing you can say is not, "I'll handle it," but "I cannot do this, and I need you to respect that." Subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.